Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Gorowski, and I will be your host for today. Really excited to be taking this virtual field trip today. Today we are at the Vermont Institute of Natural Science. We are joined by Mason and Anna, who are going to talk to us a little bit about the birds of prey, the raptors that they have at the center. So really looking forward to that. Then we'll have lots of time for Q&A with our classrooms who are joining us live from Canada and the US. So Anna and Mason, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to meeting some of your friends.
Great, thank you, Joe. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hope you guys are doing well. Good to see you. Welcome to the Vermont Institute of Natural Science. We both, Nathan and I, are environmental educators here at VINS, and a lot of what we do is about education, because we believe that the more people know about wildlife and wild animals, especially those that they can see right in their own backyards, the more people will care about those animals and about their habitats, and the more people will act on those impulses and help preserve our environment for the future. So we teach all sorts of programs featuring our live birds of prey. We have some reptiles and some turtles as well, and we'll be meeting two of our birds of prey, our education ambassadors today. But another thing we do a lot of here at VINS is wildlife rehabilitation. And that means that we have a bird hospital here on site, and we take in injured and orphaned wild birds from people that find them. Let's say you're driving down the road and you see an owl sitting on the margin of the road, and you think that's not normal, maybe that bird is injured. You can bring that injured bird to us at the Vermont Institute of Natural Sciences, where we have people with the skills to take care of these animals, to heal them up, to treat them, to give them the right diet, nutrition, and exercise to get them back out on their wings in the wild again. So our goal is to release these birds back into the wild, but for some of them, they can no longer be wild birds. Maybe they're so thoroughly injured that their injury healed in the wrong spot and they can no longer fly, or they can no longer see. They can't fend for themselves. And so for the most part, it's those animals that end up living at VINS and becoming our education ambassadors. Because they can't be in the wild, they help us do our jobs of teaching people a little bit more about their adaptations. So one of the birds we're going to meet is one such bird that had an injury in the wild, that he can no longer be a wild bird. But the other bird that we're going to meet actually has a very different story from that, and we'll talk about both of them in a bit. So any questions at all before we bring out our bird ambassadors?
Sure. So boys and girls, if you have a question before the birds come, just raise your hand and I'll know to visit your classroom. Oh, I think I see a question in Mrs. Erickson's class. Let me turn their microphone on.
Marion?
Nice and loud.
Nice and loud.
So, if you find like a bird in the middle of the road, what would you do? Because you could also easily run over it.
That is a very good question. What do you do if you find a bird in the middle of the road? Obviously, your safety is priority. You shouldn't be running out in traffic to rescue a bird, because then if you get hurt, well, then there are two people that are injured. So we recommend, if you're going to try and rescue a bird, have another person with you, especially an adult with you. And you have to keep yourself safe from the bird as well. I carry a cardboard box and a paper towel, or not a paper towel, like a bath towel in the trunk of my car, so that whenever I see a bird that is in need of help, hopefully they're off on the side of the road, we can cover them in that towel, scoop up the whole towel bird bundle and put it in the cardboard box where they'll be safe until I can get them to the bird hospital. Does that make sense?
And it's worth noting that if you don't have a towel, that's okay. A large coat often works as well.
Yeah.
Really any big cloth thing that could protect you from the bird and also help the bird not move all that much. It's also important to make sure that the top of whatever box you have closes.
Yes. Very important.
All right. Any questions before? All right. I think they're ready.
Cool. Do you want to start? Sure. Nathan's going to go get our first bird ambassador. We have them in little travel crates right now, because they don't live in this classroom all the time. We've instead trained them to sit in essentially what is a dog kennel. If you have a dog or a cat at home, we use those travel kennels. We build perches in them so the birds can sit nicely on those perches. And then they wait for their big debut, which is about to happen. And there we go. Give him a spotlight. Ooh.
So this is a barn owl. I just fed him a little piece of chicken. And a barn owl gets the name barn owl because they like to roost in barns. You know, those big buildings, sometimes on the edge of a field or in the middle of a field, used for farming of some kind. That's where they like to hang out. But if there's not a barn around, a barn owl might live on a cliff, in a cavity, or in the cavity of a tree. And if you don't know what I mean by cavity, I mean a hole. And a barn owl's favorite food is mice and voles. Two tiny little rodents that like to live in fields, which is one reason the barn is such a great home for a barn owl, because all this owl has to do in order to go hunting is wake up, roll out of bed, and start flying looking for food. So Anna mentioned that we would tell you how one of our birds' story is different than most of our other birds, and this is that bird. So his name is Aurora. We do name our birds here at VINS based off of the places that they come to us from. So he came to us from East Aurora, New York. And he was bred in captivity at a wildlife center who had an interest in conservation. So in New York, they're losing a lot of their grasslands. And grasslands is almost synonymous with prairie or field. And so barn owls love grasslands, and for a while were pretty common in New York. But as the grasslands were disappearing for a variety of reasons, were the barn owls. The wildlife center decided to breed some in captivity so that they could release some into the wild to re-boost those populations they were losing. But then some of those barn owls came to the education world, so that's us, so that we can help people learn just how cool barn owls are and why it's important to protect them and to conserve their species. And one of those reasons, by the way, is that one individual barn owl in 1 year can eat over 2,000 mice. That's a lot of mice for one little creature. And that's a lot of mice that we don't have to worry about getting into our grain sacks or eating up our wires. I just did a long round of talking. Does anybody want to ask any questions?
Let's take a little pause and do that. So let's go to Mrs. Bendo's class. They're third graders joining us in Guelph, Ontario here in Canada. Let me turn their microphone on. How are we doing, grade threes?
Good.
Anybody have any questions about Aurora the barn owl?
No, it doesn't look like. Oh, wait, one. Come on, Kai. Hurry.
Hey, does the barn owl eat only mice?
Good question. Does the barn owl eat only mice? No, actually. Barn owls will eat a number of things. They could eat small songbirds. They could eat basically, you know, little snakes, maybe little lizards that they might find in their grasslands. And this barn owl, he's eating little chopped up bits of chicken right now, the same kind of chicken you would eat at home, only we didn't cook it. But in the wild, because of a bunch of factors, barn owls do mostly eat mice.
Cool.
So I'm not going to say that they only eat mice, but they almost only eat mice.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, looks like more hands have come up, so let's take another one.
Okay, Adrian. Hurry. Come on, Kai. There you go, bud.
How old does a barnyard bird get?
How old does a barn owl get? So a barn owl could easily live into their lower teens, so like 12, 13, 14, but that's pretty old for a barn owl. They don't tend to get much older than that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're going to take a little pause from our Guelph class, and Mr. Cianfrini's class, they're joining us from Toronto, Ontario. They're a grade 6 class, but I think they might be having some camera microphone issues today. So Mr. Cianfrini's class, if you want to email me some questions or use the chat sidebar to send me some questions, and then we'll make sure they get asked. But we'll go to Mrs. Erickson's class, who is joining us from Stafford, Connecticut. We've got some grade 3s. Let me turn your microphone back on. How are we doing, grade 3s?
Do owls have bones in their neck? Like, how do they turn their neck all the way backwards?
Keen question, that one. So how do owls turn their necks so far around? What, do they just not have bones there? So they do have bones. They actually have more bones than humans do in their neck. So if you've ever heard of the word vertebrae, that's basically your backbone is made up of a bunch of vertebrae, tiny little blocks that are stacked on top of one another to form your spine, basically. And that spine goes all the way up into the base of your skull. So in our neck, humans have 7 neck vertebrae. An owl, though, like many birds, has 14. So if you can do math, you can see that that's twice as many as we have. That's one thing that helps them rotate their neck so far around. Another thing, this is harder to grasp, but another thing is that their blood vessels are so close together on either side of their spinal cord that whenever they rotate their neck, their blood vessels don't kink. Whereas with us, if we rotate our neck really far, even if we had the ability to do so, our blood wouldn't continue to get to our brain because our blood vessels would kink, or our veins. But that doesn't happen with owls.
Great question. Do you guys have another one?
Logan?
Wow. How far can a barn owl fly without resting?
How far can a barn owl fly without what?
Resting.
Resting, okay. That's a good question, and I'm afraid I don't know the actual answer to that. I don't know that anyone's really looked for it, but I can tell you that, one, barn owls don't typically migrate, so they're not flying really far like maybe a red-tailed hawk would, and so they're not flying hundreds or thousands of miles. That said, the way that they hunt at night is called quartering, and what that means is they fly back and forth across their grassland all night long, with some rests in between. And I say all night long, I mean just when they're trying to hunt. So they're actually a more active hunter than most owls are, but they're still not flying long distances. Their territory doesn't really change throughout their life. I know that's not a super specific answer, but that's the best we've got.
All right, we'll take it. So Mr. Cianfrini's class in Toronto sent in a 2-part question. The first part is, what's the largest part on the barn owl's body? And then, do you know the largest type of owl?
The largest part on a barn owl's body, if you are allowing me to include feathers, would have to be the wing. I can't really get him to open his wings, but a barn owl's wing, or any owl's wing, is usually way longer than their body would suggest. And this is what allows them to fly so easily. But if I'm not allowed to include feathers, what do you think the largest part of their body is? The skull, so the head bone, and everything in it. Owls are known to have huge eyes, so they can see really well at night. And to accommodate those huge eyes, they have to have a huge skull. Was there a second part of that question? What's the largest owl? I just learned a new one. What is it? Do you remember? It's not, though. Yeah, so up until pretty recently, we all here at VINS thought it was the Eurasian eagle owl. And perhaps that's still true, but there's at least internet musings that suggest that it's another owl who lives in Africa that eats fish. And I can't recall what it's called. It could be called the African fish owl. I know names are sometimes that simple. But the Eurasian eagle owl for many years has been considered the heaviest, the largest, and the widest wingspan of the owls. And that's an owl that exists over in Europe and Asia, hence the name Eurasia.
All right, very cool. Well, thanks for introducing us to Aurora. And it sounds like you have one more friend to introduce us to today.
We certainly do, and I'll get out of his way.
So this is a completely different kind of bird of prey who's come here to meet you guys today. Hopefully you can see him pretty well. This is Hawaii. His name is Hawaii, and you might recognize him if you've read anything about birds of prey before, especially about conservation here in the United States. This is a peregrine falcon. Now, if you guys have heard of the peregrine falcon, you've probably heard that they can go really, really, really fast. They're regarded as the fastest animal on Earth. So don't let anybody tell you that the cheetah is the fastest animal on Earth, because the cheetah can run about 70, maybe 80 miles an hour over the African savanna. But a peregrine falcon like Hawaii here, they can dive down out of the sky at over 240 miles an hour. Wicked fast. How they do this and why they do this is because they're extremely powerful predators, and they're built for efficient speed and efficient catching of other birds out of the air. This is not something that the hawks necessarily can do, and the owls certainly not. They can't catch a pigeon or a quail or a pheasant or even just a little songbird if it's actively flying away from them. They need to surprise it off a branch or something. But a peregrine falcon has evolved to be able to do just that, to grab pigeons out of big flocks. You sometimes see those large flocks of starlings. They're called murmurations, where you get maybe 200 or 300 of these beautiful iridescent songbirds forming a giant flock that just undulates through the sky. Those sometimes form as defense mechanisms against falcons, who will dive into that cloud of birds and grab one in their talons. So you might see on Hawaii, he's got pretty long wings. I'll try and turn him around. So you can see those long pointed wings that cross right over the base of his tail. He's got a pretty long tail as well. And those long pointed wings might remind you of the wings on a jet fighter, for example. A very fast airplane helps him build up speeds in that dive and maintain them while he's flapping. So they'll fly really high up in the sky. They'll use their keen raptor eyesight to spot something at or near the ground. You can see Hawaii has pretty large eyes. They're nowhere near as large as Aurora's, as the barn owl, but falcons do have pretty large eyes because they hunt a lot of the time right at dawn and right at dusk when it's not very bright out. So they need an ability to gather more light. He'll search the ground for that prey item, and then once he's seen it, he'll tuck his wings into his body, kind of like they are right now, and dive like a torpedo out of the sky, rocketing down on top of their prey. Now, they don't hit their prey at 240 miles an hour. That would hurt a lot. You know, if you try and grab something as it's going by really fast, it smacks onto your hand and it hurts. So they'll slow down a little bit right before they're going to catch their meal. And oftentimes, they won't grab it with their open talons. Raptors have these long curved toenails, so you can probably just see Hawaii's are sitting there on my glove. I call them his yellow pipe cleaners because he's got very long, very firm grasping toes. Those long toenails help him grab onto his prey even if it's gotten a little bit too far away from him. But often a falcon will ball up their toes into a little fist and literally punch their prey out of the sky and then follow it to the ground to eat it. So if you've heard of the peregrine falcon, you've probably heard of their speed. But another thing you might have heard of is their story here in North America, because the peregrine falcon wasn't always a very common bird here. They were for a very long time, very common. You would see peregrine falcons all across the United States in habitats that had open forested areas, sort of cliffs nearby where they could nest. But in the 1950s and 1960s, so 60, 50 years ago, there were fewer and fewer peregrine falcons. People like scientists, like falconers, bird watchers, people who were interested in these beautiful birds and watching them hunt, noticed there weren't nearly as many peregrine falcons as there used to be. And some scientists began to study their populations. They would climb up to these birds' nests, look at their eggs, look at their young to see if they could figure out what was going on. And it turned out that their eggshells, the peregrine falcon's eggshells, had become on average really, really thin, almost too thin for the female peregrine to sit on to incubate. She would sit on her own eggs and they would just break and go splat, and you'd have a peregrine falcon omelet instead of 4 little babies. So these scientists thought, what is going on? We need to figure out what is causing this, because this is not normal. And they discovered that it was the use of a pesticide called DDT. If you've heard of DDT before, you've probably heard a bit of this story. Basically, DDT kills mosquitoes and other bugs that eat crops. So it's really useful for humans. They'd spray it on crops, they'd spray it on beaches, spray it on people's houses, and it kills mosquitoes. But it had the unfortunate side effect of building up in the food chain. Essentially, when you would spray the DDT on your plants, an insect might come along and eat some of that plant. And maybe they wouldn't die right away. This little grasshopper now has some DDT in it. And let's say a finch or a sparrow came along and ate that grasshopper. Then he's got DDT inside of him. And then the peregrine falcon comes along and eats that sparrow. Then he has the DDT inside of him. Only it will accumulate tens and tens of times over and over again. Because that sparrow, I'm sure, doesn't just eat one grasshopper once. He probably eats 10 or 100 or 1,000. And a peregrine falcon isn't just going to eat one of those sparrows. He's going to eat 10 or 100. So eventually, this poison built up in their systems and caused peregrines to not have any more babies. Fortunately, these scientists cared enough and they recognized that this was a problem. And not only did they recognize it, but they decided to do something about it. And they went to the government of the United States and they said, hey, this is a huge problem. We're going to lose all of our peregrine falcons if we don't get rid of DDT. And so that's exactly what they did. They went to the EPA and they said, we don't want this chemical used anymore, and for these reasons. And the EPA said, yes, you're totally right. And they banned DDT use in the United States. The peregrine falcon has made a tremendous recovery since then. There were breeding programs, much like the breeding program you heard about with Aurora, to breed peregrines in captivity to help build up their population again. And so there are actually over 60 pairs of peregrine falcons breeding right here in our state of Vermont this year. And anyone who knows Vermont knows we're kind of a small little state, so we're very proud of those 60 pairs of breeding peregrine falcons that we have now. So Hawaii's story as to how he ended up here, I'm going to feed him a little bit of quail right now because he's being so delightfully good. This is his virtual debut. He has a kind of an unusual story for peregrine falcons. I said that they can be found all across the United States, all across North America. But one place you don't often see them is in Hawaii. That's because Hawaii is a tiny island in the middle of the ocean. It's really hard for a bird to get all the way out there. They do need to stop and rest occasionally. A peregrine might be able to fly for 16 hours, but they need to rest. They need to refuel after that. So he was probably blown out to sea during one of his migrations as a young bird, ended up on the island of Hawaii by pure chance. And I like to say that he was probably so grateful to see that land that he came down and crashed into the side of a building on the island of Oahu. So I don't know how well you can actually see this. I'm actually going to coax him to get his face as close to the camera as he feels comfortable. You might be able to see his beak doesn't look quite right. He doesn't have that nice raptor curve to it that the eagles and the hawks and the other falcons do. I'm letting him lick little pieces of quail off my fingers because he actually broke his beak. He broke part of his upper beak clean off when he was in that crash. So someone found him, some nice Hawaiian citizen brought him to the Honolulu Zoo, where they were able to actually 3D print him a new beak, and they glued it onto his face. Now, like many prosthetics, it was meant to fall off. So it did fall off eventually, and they hoped that he had grown back enough of that beak that he would be able to be released. But unfortunately, the actual growth plate inside of the beak was damaged. So his beak has never grown back perfectly well. Hawaii's 10 years old, and he's had that injury all of his life. So we're not confident that he would ever be able to grow back enough beak that he could tear up his own food. If he caught a pigeon, for example, or a duck, would he be able to actually eat it using that beak? So just like maybe your parents at home cut up your food for you into little bite-sized bits, that's what we do for Hawaii, because he can't do it for himself. So that's a little bit about our peregrine falcon. Do you guys have questions about him so far?
Very cool. I'm sure they do. So Mr. Sandrini's class, feel free to send some in via the chat. Let's start with Mrs. Erickson's class in Connecticut this time. Turn their microphone on. I see lots of hands.
Sarah, go ahead.
How many bones are in falcon's body?
How many what? I'm sorry? How many bones are in their body? Oh, wow. Fewer than us. And not just because they're smaller. So human beings, adult humans, I'm an adult human, I guess, have over 206 bones in their body. But birds have way fewer, and it's mostly because they have a lot of fused bones. So, for example, Nathan was talking about your spinal column before. It's made of all these little block-like bones called vertebra. Humans have a certain number of each type, the ones in your neck, the ones in your back, the ones in your lower back, and the ones in your butt. And birds have very much fewer of those. They have more neck bones, but all of their back bones are fused together in one big block. So they have fewer overall than we do, but I don't know an exact number. That'd be something to look up.
And then just to add to their bones, they're kind of hollow, aren't they? So they're a little bit lighter than ours.
They are indeed, yeah. They aren't hollow like a straw, but they have some structure to them, but they don't have as much marrow, the heavy, blood-filled, fat-filled, water-filled stuff that's in our bones. Instead, they have air, and that's what helps reduce their weight to lift them off the ground to fly.
All right, great question. Do you guys have another one, Mrs. Erickson's class?
How tall is the peregrine?
How tall is he? Oh, how tall is he, Nathan? You want to measure our peregrine falcon right here? He doesn't have a tape measure. I'm about 5.5 feet tall. So comparing him to me, I'd say he's from my glove to the top of his head, 10 inches, 11 inches, something like that. Yeah.
All right, so just over a foot if we
Yeah.
add the tail.
Yeah, we point the tail on there, 13, 14. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, let's go to our class in Guelph, Ontario. Mrs. Bendo's grade 3s. Your microphone should be on again. I see someone right up front.
How many eggs can a falcon have?
How many eggs can a falcon have? That is a really great question. The peregrine falcon, the average number of eggs they would lay is 2, maybe 3, but they can lay up to 5. I've even heard of 6. That would be amazingly large. It's a lot of work to raise 6 little falcons and have enough food for all of them. So that would only be in a situation where there was a ton of food around. If the parent falcons thought, yeah, this place is absolutely chock full of tasty pigeons. I'm going to have 6 babies this year. I might do that. But for the most part, only maybe 2 or 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
How old does he get?
He could live to be probably late teens, early 20s. Right now he's 10, so we hope he lives another 10 years with us. And that's in captivity. So a bird like this in the wild, he would probably already be considered very, very old. There's a lot of things that they face out there. Not only different chemicals in the environment and buildings to watch out for, but also predators, their own natural predators. So they're very lucky to live out their full lifespan, but if they can, yeah, 20. Good questions.
All right, so I've got 2 questions just came in from our class in Toronto. And they're wondering, it's a 2-parter. So first, do they prefer to hunt over land or water? And then the patterns on their wings, are they all the same or do they differ bird to bird?
Oh, those are great questions. So do they hunt over land or water? Predominantly over land. You won't find them hunting way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, for example. But that doesn't mean that they don't love wetland habitats. You actually find a lot of peregrine falcons on migration in tidal marshes in the Gulf of Mexico. So they're out there hunting over the coast, essentially, because they're not way out at sea. The other question about the patterns on his wings, I don't know for certain, but I would say, having worked with several different birds of prey, that probably, yes, they have very individual patterns to their feathers. Now, does that mean that a human could identify an individual bird by their feather pattern on a given day? Probably not. But it might help the peregrines distinguish each other.
All right. Very cool. Well, that's very neat to hear. They're 2 very different stories between Aurora and Hawaii. And it sounds like Hawaii's had quite an adventure to get to Vince.
He certainly has, yeah. He landed at Boston Logan Airport in September last year. So he's been with us a little over a year. Coming originally from Hawaii via California, in between. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a quick swing through our classrooms one more time. Give them
For sure.
a wrap-up question or two.
I've got Nathan here as well, if you have any other questions for him.
Sure. So, Mrs. Erickson, we'll start with your class. I'll turn your microphone on again. Do you guys have another question? I see lots of hands, so I think we probably do.
Matthew, go ahead.
You go a little louder, bud. What kind of food does a peregrine falcon eat?
What kind of food does a peregrine falcon eat? Well, truth be told, they eat a big variety of different things, but they're best built to hunt other birds. And they've been known to hunt, I think it's over 200 species of other birds are possible, are available to the falcons. But they'll eat mice too. They'll eat lizards and snakes too if they find them. It's really, they're pretty opportunistic. They'll eat what's there in front of them. Yeah.
All right. And one more, Mrs. Erickson's class. You could ask about Aurora or Hawaii, or maybe something general about birds of prey.
Yeah, Aurora's back over here. How long do peregrine falcons, and I didn't catch the last part.
Wingspan.
A wingspan. Ooh, that depends on the individual. So between 3.5, 4 feet. And in truth, this is a fun fact about raptors in general. The males are typically smaller than the females. The female raptors, they weigh more and they have a longer wingspan overall. Hawaii's a male, and we actually don't know that 100% for certain, but the reason we think he's male is because he's kind of tiny for a peregrine falcon. So I'd say his wingspan is probably 3.5 feet. And if you were to meet a female peregrine, it would be more like 4 feet or more.
All right. Back to Guelph, Ontario. Mrs. Bendo, your microphone's on.
Oh yeah, how small are they when they're babies?
Ooh, that's a great question. I love that. Both of them come out of the egg, basically egg-sized, right? They had to fit inside of that egg. So as soon as they hatch, they're really not much bigger than the egg that they laid. So for a peregrine falcon, it would be maybe that big of an egg. Wow. And for a barn owl, maybe like that. Owl eggs are actually rounder. They're more like a ball than a peregrine's egg, which has a long tapered point. When they are first ready to take their first flight out of the nest, they're full size. So they go from being that big to this big in 5 or 6 weeks.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. We'll steal one more from Guelph if you have one.
How far can peregrine falcons fly?
How far can they fly? Well, without stopping, already, I think, probably 100 miles. But with stopping, if they are on migration, per se, let's say it's fall and they're headed south for the winter, like many other birds, they will fly for maybe a month, 4 or 5 weeks, and they'll make it to 2,500, maybe 3,000 miles in that several-week migration. So that's if they can rest in between. Just like you wouldn't want to go on a road trip across the country without stopping to get out and go to the bathroom and get some snacks, right? That's what they have to do.
All right. And then the final question comes from Mr. Cianfrini's grade 6s in Toronto. And this might be a controversial question. You might have to plug Aurora and Hawaii's ears. But for each of you, which is your favorite species of bird of prey?
Oh, man. We don't have favorites at Vince. For the record. Yeah. What is your favorite?
So I have put a lot of thought into the answer to this question. And I feel like every time I come up with an answer, it's not the same answer that I had last time. So I'm not just like saying this, but I don't believe I do have a favorite species, either just to think about or to work with. I feel like when I'm thinking about that species, it's my favorite species. And when I'm not thinking about it, I probably don't care as much about it until I'm thinking about it again, if that makes any sense.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah, that's totally fair. We do work with 15 different education ambassadors that live here at VINS of about 12 different species. So we get a lot of exposure to a lot of different personalities, I would say. And it's like saying, who's your favorite friend? That's kind of tough. That being said, the striated caracara of the Falkland Islands would be my favorite bird of prey.
Very cool. So homework for the class to look up the caracara, see what it looks like.
Yes, please do.
All right. Well, Mason and Anna, thank you so much for hanging out with us. And of course, thank you to Hawaii and Aurora. That was great to learn about them, hear their stories. And I know the students really enjoyed asking some questions. So Mrs. Erickson's class, they ducked out for recess, but we still have Mrs. Bendo's class. So in a moment, I'm going to turn their mic on, and you guys are going to have to be really loud to say goodbye and thank you, because Ms. Erickson's class already had to go. And then a big thank you to Mr. Cianfrini's class for joining us from Toronto as well today. So again, Anna and Mason, thank you so much, and we look forward to another visit to VINS, hopefully in the near future.
Indeed, and thank you guys so much for joining us. It was a lot of fun.
All right, Mrs. Bendo's class, nice and loud. Goodbye and thank you. Excellent job. Thank you so much, Guelph, Ontario. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, we'll see you next time. We have a whole nother batch of Hangouts coming up next week. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye.